And this is how much Warzone has changed in 4 years. So a bit of a retrospective on Warzone. And I want to see how much it has changed in 4 years.
Warzone in March 2025.
Wait, let's go back. Let's go back.
When Verdansk returns to Warzone in March 2025, it would have been 5 whole years since the release of Call of Duty.
That's a really good point. When Verdansk comes out, I'm guessing they're going to do it on the 5th anniversary of Warzone. It's the thing that makes the most sense. I almost guarantee that's what's going to happen.
Warzone. When Warzone released, half of the entire planet was sat indoors. We're talking about a period of time where the only way to interact with your friends was online. A world where Call of Duty's version of Resurgence and Rebirth Island didn't even exist when Warzone first came out. With the 5th year of Call of Duty Warzone on the horizon, I decided to take a look back at just how much Warzone has changed in 4 years. From a 150-player Battle Royale mode to a 100-player Battle Royale mode, a Resurgence mode, a DMZ excursion at some point or another.
DMZ, I hope he goes in depth with DMZ on this, because I would love to hear like a take on that.
So much has changed in Warzone that some of the stuff you're going to see in this video will genuinely surprise or shock you. We're talking about an era of Warzone where smoke grenades didn't really exist and nobody used them. An era when nobody even conceived of using a website to figure out loadouts, and something that I guess a lot of people forgot about, an era when Call of Duty didn't even have an anti-cheat. Warzone's anti-cheat only released in October 2021 under Call of Duty Vanguard, a full 19 months after the original release of Call of Duty Warzone.
That's a great point.
There are entire limited time modes that featured once in Call of Duty's history and never returned. Take, for example, Juggernaut Royale.
Yeah, that thing sucked, though.
Random Juggernaut drops would fly throughout the entire map and come into play.
That was annoying. That was an annoying one. There's a reason for that.
Verdansk's first release in March 2020. So I wanted to take a look back in time at all of the individual eras of Warzone.
Can we just like take a moment and then be like, how many subscribers does this guy have? 160. This guy has a great voice. I get recommended his videos all the time, and I think it's because I like his voice.
Since then, we're talking about entirely different worlds in a game that's had multiple different iterations from multiple different development studios. And the first place to start is day one, Verdansk 2020. This was the era where everything was brand new. The idea of the word meta didn't really even exist, and Warzone in just 24 hours amassed.
So I remember in Call of Duty Ghosts, I made a video, and actually, let me see if I can find it. Let me see if I can find this. I made a video, and I said I think it was Call of Duty Ghosts. It might have been Advanced Warfare. I might have even changed the title of it, so I might not be able to find it. But I said the current meta of whatever game. And nobody... I changed it. It's not there anymore. Damn it. It was old, though. It was like Call of Duty Ghost era. And I said the current meta of whatever game. And no one knew what meta was. And the only reason why I knew meta is I think at the time, I was either playing Hearthstone or some other game that had a meta. And I knew what that word meant from that other game. And no one in Call of Duty was like, what's a meta? Why is he talking about this meta thing? It was a different time, man.
This was a number that would grow to 100 million downloads by the end of the year in just under 12 months.
Crazy.
In the Verdansk 2020 era, Warzone had the entire world in a vice grip that was primarily stuck at home, especially in March of 2020 when things first began.
Insane.
To put it into context, just how long ago...
Okay, I know I'm pausing this video a lot, and if you're watching this and want to listen to Tactical Brit, I'm sorry, but you need to hear this. So 3 weeks, might have been 4 weeks, before the launch of Warzone, I got contacted by Activision to go down to Infinity Ward and play Warzone early. We went, recorded gameplay, and we were allowed to come back 2 weeks before the game launched, make videos, and have them ready. I think it was like a week or I think it was a week before Warzone went live. I think it was a week after we got back, Warzone got delayed by like a week or two. So those videos that I had ready to go were delayed. On top of this, when I got back, actually when I was on my way to play Warzone for the first time, I was in line at customs because I'm Canadian, going to the US, going through customs. There was someone behind me in line and they said, have you heard about this COVID thing? If someone here is positive for it, we're all stuck in the airport. I'm like, oh yeah, that's crazy. I got back from that Warzone event sick as a dog while trying to make all of these videos for Warzone. So sick. It launches, and like that week, COVID hits and everyone is locked down. Like the timing of it was absolutely wild.
This was Verdansk 2020, released before the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X.
It did.
And the early days of Warzone were honestly just good fun. We saw effectively the first emergences of a couple of metas. The MP5 and the M4 definitely took center stage early on, and then we saw an explosive meta for a while with people running around with RPGs and C4, but the idea of a game having a certain competitive edge to it basically didn't exist in Warzone. The idea of advanced movement didn't exist. The idea of various different types of metas
Slide canceling was around, right?
Didn't exist.
Coincidence?
It was the early days of this game
Conspiracy.
that were arguably some of the purest. And this was a period of time where Warzone actually invested in having a lot of fun with the game modes. We're talking about Zombie Royale and the Haunting event.
That was a blast.
We're talking about things like Juggernaut Royale.
Yeah,
We're
that
talking
wasn't.
about things like shotguns and snipers.
That is fun.
Warzone was fully invested in messing around with the game in fun and exciting ways.
Because they could do it because they only had one map. This is a huge problem with Warzone where they have so many maps. They need to just say, fuck it. This map sucks. Nobody likes Fortune's Keep anymore. It's gone. We're just rocking Rebirth. Area 99 comes out. You know what? Rebirth is gone for 2 weeks. You know what? We're going to bring it back. Rebirth is in for a week. And then Area 99 is in for a week. But keep all of your modes. So have solos, duos, trios, and quads and everything. But have one goddamn map.
And
that's my
generally
opinion.
Didn't
Maybe
seem
it's
to care
L
too much
opinion,
about competition. Towards the end,
L take or
era
W
of
take on that,
2020,
chat.
there were definitely some growing pains. Metas definitely did start to become more prevalent as people noticed weapons like the AMAX, and people did start to realize that Warzone was going to have an underlying problem by not having an anti-cheat. PlayStation players and Xbox players also suddenly realized
Storm,
that their
link it in
brand new
chat.
consoles
It's possible.
wouldn't be capable of running Warzone any better because it wasn't developed for new generation consoles, leaving them stuck at 80 FOV in a very cross-play competitive environment.
Right,
where
80
their PC
FOV.
counterparts were playing with higher frame rates.
Oh
and
my
higher
god,
field
I forgot about this. I forgot that on PC you could play with a wider FOV because I always played on PC.
views. After 6 very content-packed seasons in the first year of Warzone, we transitioned over to Warzone's Cold War era at the end of 2020. Verdansk released in March 2020, and by later that year, we had a brand new Call of Duty. But this new Call of Duty didn't release
I'll check it out
with
after
a new
this.
Royale. There were entire rumor mills that Blackout 2 had
Hey,
been
what's
developed by the developers over at Treyarch and very swiftly abandoned. And this created a number of rumors about new maps for Call of Duty Warzone that never really surfaced. The reality of the Black Ops Cold War era is that Call of Duty didn't expect Warzone to be this successful, and didn't realize it was going to take them integrating the game every single year. This was the first adjustment period for this franchise, and something that really took them by surprise. It's safe to say that Blackout 2 was in full development, and did intend to release
This is huge. Listen to this.
with Black Ops Cold War, but with over 100 million people downloading Call of Duty Warzone, there was simply no way that they were going to abandon such a strong
Correct.
brand and a game that had effectively solidified itself amongst people like Fortnite and PUBG. And whilst this might be
And
funny
honestly,
to think about,
honestly, this is going to be a unpopular opinion. Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. If they would have released Blackout, now what they could do, imagine, let me paint you a picture. This is the 5-year anniversary of Warzone. So let's say Verdansk comes out in 2025. Yeah, it would be 2025 March. And that is the 5-year thing of it. Next year, when they're releasing this Black Ops 2025 game, Warzone, they say nothing. They say nothing. Warzone's online in the middle of games. They say nothing. No marketing around it. Someone comes on and just said, maybe they said Bravo 6 going dark, and everyone's games shut down all at once. Nobody says anything. It's just everyone's game shuts down. What would you call that? What would you call that if Warzone completely went dark? Because I would call that a blackout. And then a week later, they launch Blackout. It would boom. And essentially, it's Warzone. Essentially, it's like a new version of Warzone. It's like the Fortnite black hole thing. but it would work so well. And I think it would just completely rejuvenate Warzone. But hey,
Especially
that's just
in
a theory.
2024 and 2025, when people are longing for Verdansk to return. By the end of the year, people were wondering when the new map for Call of Duty was actually going to release, and lots of people were bitterly disappointed that the new map that came with Black Ops Cold War was in fact just a reskinned version of Verdansk set in 1984. The Black Ops Cold War era for Call of Duty Warzone is one of the most up and down eras
Someone clip that and make it into a TikTok for me somehow.
for the entire franchise. Verdansk gets nuked off the rip in a one-of-a-kind event that takes Call of Duty Warzone effective.
Sweaty Smitty literally says, Ink, you got to clip that in case Activision decides to do that. I'll
offline.
someone clip it and make it into a short, and I'll put it somewhere.
This was a really exciting moment for the vast majority of players who wanted to witness their first in-game Warzone event, and it was pretty well received, with thousands upon thousands of people watching online. But coming to the realization that they were playing another version of Verdansk that wasn't radically different from the one they'd already played, some people started to lose interest, fully aware of the fact that it could be potentially another year before they saw a new map for Call of Duty Warzone. So the Verdansk 84 era definitely had a...
So I think where a bunch of the mistakes with Warzone came in is they had this map that people loved, Verdansk, and they just took too long to make changes to it. Like, there should have been areas of this map leveled, completely changed constantly, like once a month, just like, boom, downtown's leveled, it's a completely new area. Boom, farmland is turned into something else. Boom, the prison has now been hit by a bomb, the wall's gone, that area is new, and on the other side of the map, airport, there is now a giant blimp there that you can go in at the same... There needed to be so much happening so much faster, like the Fortnite map, and they just didn't do that. Fortnite did such a better job of updating that quickly.
Not really planning for Warzone's long-term support, they also had to deal with the fact that Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War was based on an older version that was incompatible with Call of Duty Warzone.
Yes, this is what I was talking about earlier today.
Version that wasn't the
so this is what I was saying. I think it was in a different video that we were watching, but I was saying the biggest problem with Black Ops Cold War is that in Black Ops Cold War, you were playing on a different engine than in Warzone, which meant that every time you switched between the two, it felt completely different, which felt awful. That was the biggest complaint I had with Black Ops Cold War. And not saying that one of the engines was better than the other, they were just different, and jumping between the two felt wrong. And it was clearly a thing that Activision wanted the games to feel the same, similar, crossover, compatible, and it just wasn't that way.
UA engine, which meant that every character skin, every weapon skin, and every major change that happened in Black Ops Cold War had to be recreated and reinvented from scratch in the IWA engine. This meant that some character skins looked different and probably effectively doubled development time throughout the entirety of this game's lifecycle. And Warzone definitely suffered a period of time of bugginess as a result of this. And that wouldn't be the end of trouble for the Cold War era. There were 3 major incidents within the Cold War era that...
I just got a really good idea for a video. I need to write it down and I need to say nothing. I know this is really weird, me doing this like in the middle of nowhere, but if I don't write this down, I won't remember it, and it has to do with Warzone. And I don't make a ton of Warzone videos anymore, but this is a really good idea. It has to do with what we talked about. My game, there we go. Okay, I just need to write this down before I forget it. Come on, come on, come on. Okay, computer, you can do this.
really defined how Call of Duty's identity began to change in terms of Warzone. The first was arguably the DMR meta, which was such a large meta that it had the world going crazy, with athletes and superstars and even musicians calling on Call of Duty to change how this weapon worked.
Is this a thing?
Whilst they grappled with the fact that they had 2 different game engines and couldn't necessarily deal with them efficiently. And it effectively meant that for the first time ever, Call of Duty fans were starting to focus on the things that were broken in the game, the metas that were broken, and how to potentially abuse them. And I would argue that the Cold War era DMR meta was arguably the first time the idea of metas or competition or people having competitive advantages over opponents began to slip into the Warzone conversation. We did start to see it with the AMAX towards the end of Verdansk, but with the DMR, this was, I feel, an industry-defining moment for Call of Duty Warzone.
Interesting.
Something that people
I've
really
never heard.
underlook.
I underlooked this the way that he's comparing it. This is actually really, really interesting. How he's talking about how a specific meta completely affected and changed essentially the history of Warzone.
This time, even casual Joes sat at home was starting to wonder why their guns weren't performing better than other people's, and how that they could change that.
This is a really good
the
point.
Ultra-specific loadout meta that we know today, with various metas being found every single update, with every single change tracked and traced, definitely stems from the Cold War era of Warzone. The second major thing is that skill-based matchmaking started to become on the radar for even casual conversations within Warzone, with players starting to wonder how matchmaking was working within the scene, and why it appeared that some people had easier games than others, especially in the space.
They need to reset Warzone with every COD, but that won't ever happen. I actually agree with you, Zappy. I think they need to have a game reset where all the guns are reset to, like, it's going to be super weird this year with prestiges. And I have a video coming out about this because it'll probably be on Friday or something like that. But think about it. You play Warzone and you need to level up a character, and then you prestige, and that relocks everything. So when you prestige, if you're just playing Warzone, won't it be more beneficial for you just to use the Modern Warfare 3 or Modern Warfare 2 weapons that you already have completely unlocked? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? So the only way to actually implement a brand new game, and only that brand new game, is to get rid of everything else. And they won't do that because then everyone's skins would reset. It's a huge, huge problem. And what I just said with the whole getting rid of Warzone and making it blackout would, first of all, blow up, be goddamn huge, but that allows you to do a reset. Problem is no one would know about it and people would complain.
Now, whilst I'm not accusing anybody here, there's no denying that there were some content creators during this era who had definitely figured out the formula before others. The discovery and conversation surrounding skill-based matchmaking meant that people were actively starting to track their lobbies, with the introduction in the Cold War era towards the Vanguard era of SPMM tracking websites, people figuring out how hard the lobbies they were in, and also statistics being used to identify how Call of Duty's matchmaking system worked. All of this would be swiftly taken offline by Call of Duty in the not too distant future, who to this day are still not particularly keen on talking about how Warzone's matchmaking system worked.
I want to read this. Hey, it's 5-star said, the legality of bundles is why they can't really do a complete reset unless they add in fine print that says bundles can be removed from games at any time. So they've done it, right? Cold War skins are not in Warzone anymore. Vanguard skins are not in Warzone anymore. They've done it. But now people are expecting it to be there with every game. And that is the issue. It's expected now. And that actually might be legal grounds to stand on. When something's expected like that. Yeah.
But it did become particularly clear that even to casual audiences who weren't necessarily hyper involved with gaming, that skill-based matchmaking was a conversation that was being had. And players felt that they were being a little bit confused or cheated by how the Call of Duty system worked. And the third biggest conversation, which definitely linked into the Call of Duty SPMM conversation, was that cheating started to become an epidemic on the main stage for Warzone. Whilst it was definitely something that existed before, as players progressively fell off of the game and didn't use it as much in their regular rotation as new titles released, a more condensed
like Ink said, just make Warzone a live service. Okay, what do you mean by that, Zappy? Because I think you might mean something different than I was originally saying, but I'm curious.
Matchmaking pool with more skill-based matchmaking meant that cheaters were starting to permeate a lot of lobbies, and were starting to get real visibility amongst content creators and professional players who explained that this game didn't have an anti-cheat. And once it was clear that Warzone didn't have an anti-cheat,
that was a huge thing.
Effectively the Wild West until they did develop one at a later date. The only way that you could avoid cheaters...
Also, I'm finding it kind of crazy that they haven't talked about like Caldera very much here at this point.
Warzone was literally to block them. Reporting them effectively led to nothing, and manual ban waves only got a small number of cheaters in comparison to the numbers that were used. But the Cold War era wasn't necessarily a complete failure, and in fact it had a lot of success too. The Cold War era actually introduced some well-loved changes to Verdansk, like opening up the stadium, and definitely introduced arguably the biggest thing in Call of Duty's history,
Rebirth
Warzone,
Island,
which is resurgence. People don't realize
Blackout
that
actually
Call of Duty's
introduced that.
resurgence system only released in December of 2020. The return of Rebirth Island was something that wasn't there from launch. Many people make the mistake of thinking that Call of Duty has always had resurgence, but in reality, it was something that was introduced into the game's first year of its life cycle. Resurgence as a mode is so popular now that it arguably probably does dwarf the big map content ecosystem, and you can see that from the most recent year of Call of Duty.
Yeah, so this is a really big thing, right? Is I would love to see the numbers of people playing Rebirth to people playing big map. I would love to know what the numbers are comparatively, because as of right now, I think Resurgence is probably way the hell more popular than big map.
Also, casual players definitely lean towards the respawn modes.
Whoa. I kind of love this idea. Warzone needs to add a vault system, like keep all the guns unvaulted in Plunder, but vault certain ones in regular Warzone. Ooh. I kind of like that.
To say that the introduction of something like Resurgence ended up completely reshaping the landscape not only for big map, but also in terms of the mechanics available to it. Ultimately, Call of Duty secretly discovered a very key feature that casual players who just wanted a bit of fun really liked the idea.
The problem is at some point they're going to hit a tipping point where there are too many operator skins in Warzone, and the game file is just too big. Like, maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, but
Idea of respawning. The Cold War era also had a lot of fun with things like weapon skins and masterclass bundles, and also changing things like having red door systems and Easter eggs within Warzone, and was definitely an era of Warzone that to this day is still remembered quite fondly, despite its ups and downs.
Sure.
It only took until Vanguard in the release of October 2021 to winter of 2021, and this new era of Warzone, that Call of Duty arguably got its hardest cold shoulder. After player fatigue.
See, that I don't know if I agree with 5-star. He says, when the meta is broken, vault the gun until it's fixed and then unvault the gun. I don't know how I feel about that one. I think the vaulting of weapons should be for old weapons. And then, yeah, maybe those weapons are available in LTMs or Plunder or things along those lines. Also, hear me out. With the most recent pandemic, no, it's not called pandemic mode. Plague mode? What's that new mode in the game? It's an interesting thing that they added a 2-hour no time limit mode in, because that would be perfect for leveling up gun purgatory for like free to play players. It would be perfect for them, right?
Fatigue effectively took over during the Cold War era, and people started to wonder about certain parts of the game not working the way they thought it would, or just generally feeling a little bit frustrating. The Vanguard era was definitely the least popular era of Warzone. The Caldera map itself had a very cold reception, with lots of open spaces, greenery that made visibility miserable, and generally something that was really hard for console players to enjoy, just down to the visuals alone.
True.
This entire era was basically marred by a map that felt incompatible with Warzone.
Okay, hear me out. The problem with Caldera is it was like a giant pylon. The middle of the map was higher than the edges, so it just played like a pylon. So you go in the middle and you're above everyone else, and then you have to go down or up depending on which way you're going, and I hated it. I hated that.
Wanted to see a new map for Call of Duty Warzone, and definitely were looking to see the end of the Verdansk era. Nobody was expecting a wide open green space to be the replacement for a beloved urban environment.
True.
And despite Call of Duty Vanguard reintroducing the main multiplayer title to the IWA engine, and therefore making Warzone development easier, World War II weapons were generally quite unpopular, planes and bombers were unpopular, and the Caldera map I think is arguably remembered as the least popular big map appearance in all of Warzone. The Caldera era wasn't entirely terrible, and definitely tried to do some unique and interesting things with limited time events and a Godzilla vs King Kong event that arguably maybe wasn't the most fondly remembered. But it did also
that was
mark
okay. The
release
reason why the Godzilla vs King Kong event is not fondly remembered is mainly because it fucked the canon of the game. Like, for lack of a better way of saying it, all of a sudden you go from like a game that has this like continuous story of Verdansk, where there's the story of the 84 into the year 2019, and like all of this happened. Caldera comes in, and all of a sudden Godzilla and King Kong are there, and everyone's like, what the hell just happened to this story? That's like a bigger deal. Exactly. What canon? Exactly.
The anti-cheat for Call of Duty Warzone, which by the release in 2021 was desperately required. The cheating conversation and situation with Warzone had genuinely gotten so bad that I genuinely do not blame people for giving up playing Warzone. I mean, we were talking about cheaters that were so prevalent and so problematic that entire swathes of players basically just felt like winning a game of Warzone would forever be beyond them. The one thing I definitely will always appreciate about the Vanguard era of Warzone is that in June 2022, it did give us the release of Fortune's Keep, which to this day, in my view, is still the best resurgence map we've ever had, and still the best designed resurgence map we've ever had. And whilst it didn't have the longest shelf life in the world,
that is a hot take.
To me, was a really nice escape from Caldera.
It definitely was, and I think that's why it's so fondly looked at, is because Caldera sucked.
The Vanguard era, generally speaking, Call of Duty Warzone plateaued. It didn't really have new content that brought people into the game, and it ultimately felt very stale and different from what people remembered and enjoyed from the earlier iterations of the game. And the Caldera era, arguably in my view, is the first decline of Warzone.
Agreed.
So it's no surprise that in November 2022, the Modern Warfare 2 era began and Al Mazrah released.
Oh boy, this is a big downfall.
To this day, I don't think has been topped. I genuinely think Al Mazrah is the best map we've seen in Call of Duty Warzone for Big Map, and although the mechanics were fundamentally different, I would love to see it return to the franchise.
This is a freaking hot take, and I love it.
But November 2022 was effectively the great reset for Call of Duty Warzone. I mean, we're talking about a game that went from fast-paced and fluid gameplay through all of the previous versions and iterations to a game that effectively resembled a hybrid milsim mode that just felt like it wasn't Warzone at all.
Yes.
The Modern Warfare 2 era completely changed how Warzone worked. We're talking about radical changes, no loadout drops to be seen for entire swathes and segments of the map. We're talking about looting systems that introduced backpacks that felt more like the
you know what? You know what? This is a hot take, but I don't think he's necessarily wrong. He's saying that the map is good, but the mechanics of the game blew. And you know what?
The extraction mode
I'm listening.
And less like a fast-paced battle royale. And we're talking about a game that just didn't really feel like Warzone. An era for Warzone that's so different from everything that came from before.
This is so true.
Floating loot disappeared. Interacting with a loot crate meant that you brought up a miniature menu. An era where effectively every single building in the entire map featured artificial intelligence that wanted to shoot you.
Oh yes, I forgot about that.
And gameplay of how Call of Duty worked. The introduction of things like black sites and strongholds that felt almost incompatible with the overall design of Warzone.
Yeah, those should have just stayed in DMZ.
Slower gameplay that just felt like we were playing Warzone with bricks on our feet. And the world really did respond to this. It's no surprise that from the release of November 2022 for Al Mazrah...
By the way, just to be clear, completely Infinity Ward's fault. I just want to put that out there. This was Infinity Ward that made all these decisions. They thought that since they originally made Warzone, they knew what was best for the game, and they fucked it up. I just want to be clear on that, because I don't know if that's widely known, but it's completely Infinity Ward's fault.
The interest in search results for Call of Duty Warzone plummeted to the lowest level it's ever seen before. The slower paced gameplay didn't work out, the AI gameplay didn't work out, and it felt like fans, YouTubers, and the general audience for Warzone were trying to get their version of Warzone back from Infinity Ward, who were unwilling to change. And it doesn't help that they left things like a broken vector and RPK meta in the game for as long as humanly possible. By the summer the following year, Modern Warfare 2 had tried to undo a fair number of the changes it had already made because of the fact that it was losing players at an alarming rate, and had a little bit of a resurgence with Modern Warfare 2's Big Map ranked in summer, which definitely went down a lot more successfully than I think Call of Duty give it credit for. I genuinely think that if Big Map Rank didn't release that summer, you probably would have seen the end of interest in Warzone from content creators and streamers at that very moment. They also brought us Ashika Island in this era, which was fun. Also quite deeply unpopular.
He's not saying it, but I also feel like DMZ kind of kept the game alive at that point as
Generally
well.
speaking, Modern Warfare 2's version of Warzone, and arguably Infinity Ward's baby returning to them, was the least popular era Call of Duty has had so far.
Yep.
And this all leads to the Warzone that we have today. I mean, it really does go to show just how much has changed. Redeploy balloons didn't exist. Redeploy packs and flares didn't exist. Portable buy stations weren't a thing. There was a period of time where stopping power doubled the power of any gun.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Gas mechanics didn't exist beyond a gas mask. There was no portable decontamination stations. There were no perks that interacted with the gas system. Airstrikes used to go through entire buildings and kill people.
Now
even though they
bunker
were inside
busters
a
do.
building. Perk packages completely were introduced into the game as lootable items that weren't previously lootable before. The looting system went from not having a backpack to having a backpack to having the backpack removed in Black Ops 6's era, which is upcoming.
Yeah, that's a good
Floating
point.
loot has never made a return to Warzone, for
Which it
reasons
should.
that I don't think anybody quite understands. Loadouts completely disappeared and then were reintroduced in the Modern Warfare 2 era. And for those of you who don't remember, when Almaz were released, there were AI in every
Wait. Everything he's saying here is correct, but I want to ask you a question. Why? Simple question, why? Because they keep switching the studio that works on Warzone. When they keep throwing Infinity Ward in to make stupid decisions, it ruins the game every single time. So just tell them to keep their hands out of it, and that is that.
single building. I'm not even kidding. This is something that people have completely forgotten about. There were AI in nearly every single building in Warzone. The
When it
eras
first
of
launched,
Warzone
he's
that
right.
I've completely described to you here are so different from one another, and it's going to change again in Black Ops 6 with the introduction of a new movement system
Yep.
that will fundamentally change how Warzone works again.
100%. I
hope
think
you
it'll be
guys
good.
enjoyed
I
this
think it'll be
video.
good
If you
for it,
have,
but
drop a like, drop a sub, and I'll see you in the next one.
great video. Great video. Great video. That was the Tactical Brit. We watched him before. He's great, and go check it out. But yeah, I love to see those kind of like retrospective videos. They really put into context like what we're looking at as a community and moving forward. And W video, yeah, back-to-back W videos. That is for sure.